Well, I will leave you to it.
All right,
and
excellent.
if you're happy, just give me a wave and we'll do a bit of a Q&A at the end if you would like.
Okay, excellent.
All right, great.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Sven Winke. I'm the creative director and founder of Larian Studios. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about Original Sin. Now it's going to be one of those PowerPoint presentations, so you're not going to see a lot of video. You'll see a little bit of it, approximately 1 minute. But I promise that there will be people that are dying. There will be a little bit of romance in the game also. So hopefully I will entertain you. Before I start talking about Original Sin 2, I need to tell you very quickly about Original Sin 1. I know that most people probably already played Original Sin 1. Is there anybody here who didn't play Original Sin 1? All right, so for those guys, I have to explain what Original Sin 1 was. It's a top-down turn-based RPG. It was released in 2014. What was special about it was that it had a pretty cool combat system in which you could combine all kinds of elements. So, for instance, you could make it rain. And when it was raining, then you would be able to cast electricity at the water that appeared on the floor, and then that water would be electrified. So if somebody would walk into it, they would then be stunned. But you could also cast, for instance, fire at the water, and then a steam cloud would arise, and then you could electrify that steam cloud. Or you could smash a poisonous barrel, then you would get poisoned. If you would burn the poison, you would get a poison cloud. And then if you would put fire on the poison cloud, it would explode. And like this, you could all kinds of elemental interactions, and that led to a lot of fun, because obviously you use them to your own advantage. The other thing that Original Sin 1 did pretty well, I think, is that it didn't hold your hand. So if it told you you have to solve a murder, pretty much that was what it was going to tell you. Solve the murder, and that was it. And for the rest, you had to explore, talk to people, break into their houses, interact with the environment, try to figure out who the murderer was. You could even talk to animals if you had a particular pet pal talent. And there were a whole bunch of ways that you could solve these quests, and the one thing that was guaranteed, that nobody was going to hold your hand. So people seemed to enjoy that. And then the other thing that was special about it was that you had cooperative multiplayer in a way that is very rarely done. Actually, I've never seen a game that did it similar, in the sense that 2 players could play the game. They could affect the entire world in whatever way they wanted. The other player would have to live with the consequences, and yet the story would churn on, so everybody would be able to finish the story despite whatever the other player would have done. Obviously, you had to cooperate to be able to finish the game. And then finally, it came with an editor, which allowed people to make their own mods. It did very well. It was very well received. A lot of people called it Game of the Year. And as a result, obviously, we started thinking of a sequel, which was Divinity Original Sin 2. And so we went to Kickstarter. We went to Kickstarter with the first one. So we went to Kickstarter again with the second one, and we raised double the amount of money. So the first one raised $1 million. This one raised $2 million. And so obviously now everybody expects us to make double as good a game. And so that puts us under a lot of pressure. And so today I'll show you how we're going to try to achieve that goal of making double so good a game, if you can quantify that. So what was the special thing about Original Sin? It's pretty much listed here, and so we said we're going to do more of it. So we're going to have a more reactive and systemic game world. So what I mean with that is that the world is going to react even more than it did in Original Sin to your actions, because the plan is that we are going to let you very free so that you can break the rules, break the system all the time, which is indeed how a lot of people actually finished Original Sin, by breaking the system. We're going to put a stronger narrative in there. One of the things that we didn't do as good as we wanted to do with the original game was the main storyline. So we're putting a lot of emphasis in making a stronger narrative in there and embedding that into our systems. So what that means, I'll explain in a second. This time we're allowing you not only to play cooperatively, but also competitively. So you will be able to play with friends, against friends, and seamlessly change that. So for instance, I might be cooperating with you. At some point you work on my nerves, and then I'm going to tell you, well, you know what, I screw you, I'm going to start hindering you. But not only in a competitive manner in the sense that you can fight against each other, but also by affecting the narrative. So you can basically go and play in a narrative manner against each other. And you haven't seen that in the game yet, so I'll try to explain what that means. And then obviously we want to reward you for, as I said, breaking the system, exploring, experimenting, exploiting people, exterminating them. And we want to make the combat more diverse. We're doing a lot of things to the combat system that we had. We're retaining the same core. And I think that if you played the original one, you're going to be pleasantly surprised by the things we have in our kitchen. This is the last big slide, and then the rest will be all concrete examples. So how did we put these ambitions into features? Well, we made the world more mature, more consistent. We spend a lot of time on building a world that you can believe in, that has a history, that makes sense. We have a much stronger main narrative than I had before, but it doesn't interfere with the fact that you can break the game, that you can do whatever you want. It will keep on running. We put a lot of effort in creating conflicting origin stories, conflicting races and personalities, because conflict is the mother of all drama. So you get a lot of extra story coming from the fact that each person in the game now has an identity, which was not the case in the original game. Actually, as a matter of fact, the main narrative was that they lost their identity. And so you can play with up to 4 players, competitively. That means that 2 players can be playing against 2 players and play a story against each other. So playing a story against each other is very, very cool. And then we obviously we improved on our RPG system. We made a combat system that takes advantage of all of that. We made quests that take advantage of the new RPG system. And then we have a Game Master mode also. The Game Master mode is something that came there as a result of the Kickstarter campaign. It was our final stretch goal. And the Game Master mode is essentially, well, it was originally called Dungeon Master mode, but Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast have the trademark on that, so now you know. And hence we call it Game Master mode. But essentially what you can do is 4 players can be playing, and then a Game Master can actually be modifying the game world as you go. You can even do that to the main campaign. So for instance, you could take the main story that we've been making, start playing it and say, oh, Larian, you screwed up here, you screwed up there, you know what? I'll fix that, while the other guys are playing. And that's a lot of fun. So you can really interfere in a variety of ways in the things that we have been preparing. And we're also making a better editor than previously, because while it was powerful and it was the same editor that we used to make the game, it was unfortunately a little bit hard to use. So we're trying to improve that. All right, so let's start talking about the more mature world very quickly. The original game was made by 1.5 writer. That's these guys here. So Jan started writing. Sarah joined us in the middle of the game. Then Jan left for a world trip because the game was a year late, and so he had everything arranged. So these 2 were responsible for the full game. And then all of these have now joined our team to work on the story, although the length of the game is going to be similar to the first one, but there's going to be much more variation, choice, and consequence that you can have. There's going to be a lot more little things that you will notice when you're going through the game that make a lot of sense and that lead to discovery of a beautiful world, which these guys have been working on for a very long time already now. So thousands and thousands of pages have just been written about the world, about how an elf talks, how a lizard talks, what the thing is between the lizard and the elves, etc., etc. And so to support that, we also hired a whole bunch of new concept artists. They're creating artwork that supports the vision that has been created in that narrative. Then obviously we have Chris that joined us also as a result of the Kickstarter campaign. So he is a writer of some renown, and he's been adding quite a lot to the quality of our main narrative. And indeed is also taking care of one of the origin stories, but I'll explain that in a second. So these are the minions, and we have dragons. I'm going to be showing you a bunch of screenshots. I was mentioning this to some few people here before. My art director actually didn't want me to have any screenshots with me because none of this stuff is finished yet, so this is all very early work. And as we progress, because the examples will become more advanced, the quality of the artwork is going to decrease, all right? Because at some point we'll even be seeing gray boxes and things that are unlit, but trust me, when it's going to be finished, it's going to be looking very, very, very nice. Okay, so that's about the mature world. Let's start talking about the interesting stuff. Well, the other things was, of course, also interesting. You start the game by creating your character, obviously, since it's an RPG. Contrary to the first original sin, you create 1 main avatar, and then you select up to 3 companions, right? So you're going to select those companions. If you're playing on your own, obviously, if you're playing in multiplayer, each player is going to select his main avatar, and then some companions can join. Your main avatar is going to have an origin story. You're going to pick that origin story. You can select from a number of origin stories. You can actually also make your own origin story using a generic system. And that origin story is going to define, the theme of the game is origins. So it means that what your origins are, who you are, where you come from, what happened to you in the past, how that affects the choices that you're going to get in life. That's pretty much the thing around this in which this entire game has been made. And you're going to see quite a lot of examples of that. So for instance, if I'm going to decide to play as the Red Prince, who is a lizard, he used to be a noble in the ancient empire. His wife and his kids suddenly started accusing him of heinous crimes. The man has been falling from power at an extremely fast pace. He's now reviled as the next worst dictator ever in the world by everybody. Everybody hates him. And so he finds him in the gutter at the beginning of the game, and he's still trying to figure out what the hell happened to me. So that is one origin story you can take. There's a whole bunch of other origin stories. I'm not going to spoil them right now. And then once you pick that origin story, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to pick your race. Now, some origin stories will fix you in one particular race. So if I am, for instance, going to be the Red Prince, I will be a lizard, because he's the only red lizard in all of the entire ancient empire, so obviously he has to be a lizard. It would not work to be a red undead. However, there are some origin stories that fit more races, and then you can select more races. And some origin stories allow you to select any of the races. So the races that are available are the lizards of the ancient empire, the Ataraxian undead, so that's an undead. So playing as an undead is a very special experience. We have the wood elves, we have the humans, and then we have the imperial dwarves. And so all of these have their backstories. They all have something that's special about them. So race not only determines your options and how people will look at you, but it will also determine some of your skills and talents. We'll talk about that in a second. And then you're going to select a whole bunch of other things. You're going to select your personality. We refer to it as how did you survive puberty. So you're going to select a number of traits that indicate how you would negotiate kindergarten or school, trying to convince other people of doing what you want. You're going to select your gender, which can have an impact depending on where you are and which races you're interacting with. You're going to select your stats, so your skills. This is a classless game, so that means that you can select any skill that you want at level 1 and then progress through the game. And then you can, like say, start as a wizard, but then mix in some warrior skills and take some ranger skills if you want, or take some necromancer skills or some polymorpher skills. And you can mix and match that and try to make the optimal character. And then you're going to select your looks, and your looks are probably the only thing, unless maybe we find a use for it, that do not affect gameplay. All the rest of these things are going to determine your choices, your options that you're going to get through the game. And the way that works is with something that we call tags. Now, you've seen that before, but my claim is that Original Sin 2 is going to take this much, much, much further than you are used to, except maybe for a few examples that I have in the back of my mind. So, what's the tag system? Well, it's pretty much what you're seeing here. The traits that are associated with your character, which you get through your origin story, through your race, through your personality, are going to determine some of the options that you can say. And then depending on those options, obviously, you're going to get different responses. So I put the iceberg image here because one of our writers compared this to every single dialogue I see. She said is like an iceberg. I know how much stuff there's under there, but I only see like a couple of the options that are there. And I know that depending on what tags I'm going to have, what I did in the game, I'm going to see completely different dialogues that are going to lead to completely different outcomes. And so here's a couple of examples of that. So we have here a mad geist, and never mind what a geist is. And we see 4 different dialogues, depending on which party member is talking to that particular geist. And so the claim that we have with Original Sin 2, and obviously you're not going to believe a word of what I'm saying, is that pretty much every single dialogue that you're going to encounter in the game does this. All right, so you're going to always have this feeling that the dialogue is tailored to your particular character in function of what tags you have. So behind the scenes, this obviously leads to great fun for our scripters and our dialogue designers, because you get this enormous amount of permutation. This is a very simple one-liner dialogue. So, and you just see already that how those things are already changing in function of who you are, what traits you have. I don't think I can see them here, but they are going to be probably more of the personality tags if I see that list. So for instance, here we have another example. Here it's vice versa. Here it's not necessarily the questions that change, it's the entire dialogue, and indeed the entire quest that's going to change in function of who I am. And we did a lot of those too. So this guy here is a soldier in the ancient empire. He's been thrown in this place where we start the game in. The fact that our characters are naked is not because they start naked, it's just because the character models have not been assigned yet. The equipment models have not been assigned yet to the characters. So it's because it's etc. Work in progress and pre-alpha, and I said it enough. So this guy here, if he talks to a dwarf, he recognizes her as a soldier, and he stands at attention, and then I can salute because I have my soldier tag. But if I talk with my lizard to him, I get a different dialogue. He says, "Which house are you from?" All right, so because the ancient empire lizards, they all belong to a certain house, and that's going to give me different options. So that's that dialogue here behind the scenes, and you see actually that indeed there's a completely different block for the lizards than there is for the other characters that are going to be talking to those lizards. And as you progress through the game, you'll notice that often just selecting the right character to talk to somebody is going to lead to different gameplay. Sometimes exclusive gameplay, meaning that if I talk to a guy with my lizards rather than with my human, I might have go on a different track. And that takes you quite far into the feeling that you're actually playing the role of that character. Okay? That's not the only thing we're doing with those origin stories. I mentioned racial skills and talents, so I can give you one here. I don't want to mention all of them yet. Or elves. No, so first of all, when I was talking about the more mature storyline thing, our writers are taking the opportunity in the past we invented as we went. Now we took much more time to develop our world, so that also means that we're for once and for all trying to establish like a real big lore Bible in the Divinity games that makes a lot more sense and that's a lot less stereotypical. So for instance, our elves, when somebody dies, they eat a piece of them. And why do they do that? To absorb their memories. So they're kind of memory eaters. And it leads to all kinds of fun gameplay, because if you slay an enemy, you can eat his limb, for instance. You can gnaw at his limb, and you might learn some of his memories, or you might learn one of his skills, and that leads to gameplay which is unique for the elves. If a zombie, if a human tries doing that, he might get the diseased. So he's going to get the disease status, and in Original Sin, if you're diseased, you infect other people. So get close to someone, and so you can start thinking of systemics with that. But if a zombie does that, so if you have the zombie talent, you're healing yourself. So zombie is a talent that you can get. We'll talk about it a little bit later on also. So there's all kinds of things that start happening just because of the racial skills and talents. And obviously, if you have a party where everybody has these racial skills and everybody has these racial skills and talents, then you get all kinds of interesting gameplay. And then for the narrative and quests that you are going to see, well, they're going to be often very different depending on what your origin story is. So if you are, for instance, Ifan Ben Metst of the Metst Marauders, he's a lone wolf, he's a kind of a mercenary. The other lone wolves in the world will recognize him and offer him things, or not, depending on the fact that he's there in your party or not. And so the cool part is when you start playing the game, you know, like depending on which origin story I pick here, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm never going to see. All right, so if you play it again, obviously, you will be able to see all kinds of other things. All right, so that about, the last thing I should have said about the origin stories is we made sure that they're conflicting. All right, and we did that on purpose because we have this idea of competitive multiplayer in our head, and I'll start talking about that. So these origin stories are not necessarily going to be very compatible with each other, but you find yourself thrown together, forced by fate, and you'll have to deal with that. Will you compromise, or will you try to force your will over the other origin stories, who will then have to compromise or sacrifice in turn? And so that becomes quite interesting when you're playing it in multiplayer, because if there's 4 origin stories playing in the game and everybody has a conflicting goal, well, obviously, you know that at some point something is going to have to crack. So let's see how the multiplayer works. I said here unique narrative multiplayer, again, because I would really like to play a game like this myself that I don't know the story of, and I can't find it. And the reason is because typically you have these systemic things in games where there's like, find me 8 rabbits, and then after somebody did the 8 rabbits, the rabbits magically reappear. So that doesn't happen in Original Sin. Everything that you do impacts the world forever. It never changes again. But what we do also is we let you go wherever you want. All right, so 4 players are traveling throughout the world at completely different locations, and they are affecting things. Like she might, for instance, decide to blow up this salt mine, okay? And the salt mine is then gone. And this guy will never see the salt mine. He will only see the ruins of the salt mine. And if it happened to be that in that salt mine there were plenty of traders who were trading things, they're gone forever. So there will never be a trade for this character. Maybe you will not like that. So again, the graphics here are still early work, so there will be a whole bunch of polish which is going to be applied on top of it. But I wanted to make the point that of the characters walking around in the world freely like this, because it poses a whole bunch of problems for us, which luckily we are solving so that you're going to have much more fun. So why is it that there are no more games doing this? It's just because it's a lot of work. There's really a lot of work. It's a lot of development risk also. And in the eyes of the people that typically finance these games, it's not necessarily worth it. But people that played Original Sin, of course, know better. All right, so let's take a look at an example. Here we have a very early checkpoint event in the game. You have to get into the other side there. The party arrives. And these guys decide that they're going to be those incredibly annoying gatekeepers, thugs, and they will look for a fight. Okay, so while one character is talking, I can switch to my other character, and I can say, you know what, I'm going to try to sneak behind him. All right, because while he's talking, which would typically be the case in a game, and I can just walk in. But the scripters have thought of that, so, a second dialogue starts. So we now have 2 dialogues that are in progress. So, and there are 2 different dialogues. I'm still controlling this in single player, so I'm not doing it in multiplayer. So I switch to my other party member, and I say, you know what? I can try it again. There's only 3 guys sitting here, so eventually they're going to run out of guys that can talk to me. But then the scripter said, nope, that's not going to work. I'm going to put you in a fight in this particular case, which is not so bad, because then the 4th guy can walk away, and he can now finally take that rope which the other guys would not have let him take. And so he can get on top of this tower and look down. These guys are still fighting. They're in turn-based combat. The way that works, if you haven't played Original Sin, it's a bit hard to explain, but we have this unique system that turn-based combat can be busy while the other players are playing in real time, so you're never blocked. And the way that works is basically if you enter in this zone, you're going to participate in turn-based combat, and here you're just going to be running in real time. And it sounds strange and it's twisted in terms of time, but it actually works quite well. So there's that. So that's one example, and the message here is, our scripters have had to think of a gameplay like this, of having these fallback solutions for every single situation in the game, because there's 4 players. The advantage that is there for you as a player, especially if you're playing in single player, is that you can start abusing the system like this. I'm going to switch to this character, I'm going to control him, I'm going to position him here. You have all kinds of teleport features that you can use. So you could have, for instance, teleported somebody on top here if you could see it. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do to break the system, but the system will react to you because we thought of all these multiplayer options, and that creates, in my opinion, quite a lot of unique fun. Okay. So my statement here is actually that because we are making a multiplayer narrative RPG, the single player is so much better. So if we would only be making a single player game, what we would have done is we would have said, ha, the dialogue starts. Well, you're in the dialogue. You're stuck in the dialogue. Nobody else can do anything anymore. But because we supported the multiplayer, we have this unique gameplay where we can actually let you fool around with the entire party. And here's another thing, because that's also, I keep on forgetting this one, but it's really important. I don't know if many of you played Baldur's Gate back in the days. Or there's an enhanced edition coming now, or there's actually a new part coming. That's even cooler. In Baldur's Gate, you had one avatar that could talk to NPCs, right? So, and he was the guy that could talk. So you could switch around, and you could have characters walking all over the place, but there was only one guy, and then it was you have to gather your party before venturing forth. Now here, because we have origin stories for every single companion, you can take control of any character and you can talk to all the NPCs. So you can have 4 conversations running simultaneously in single player. And again, that leads to all kinds of interesting systemic gameplay, thanks to the multiplayer. All right, party gameplay. So the message here is another example actually of how you can abuse that system, but it's also how it leads to competitive multiplayer, which is going to be my next point. So we have a quest here that is going to be given by this guy, and the guy has the key for this poor soul who has been locked up here. Again, the graphics have not been lit, shaded, etc. So player 1 accepts this quest. This time the party is split up. So these are 4 players that are playing in multiplayer. Player 2 arrives, picks up the same quest, all right? There might be a reward in there. So the first one that's going to manage to get to do this quest, if they're not, because they're not allied here, the first one is going to get the reward. The other one will not get the reward. So third player arrives and pickpockets the guy. So he's going to take the key out of his pockets while the other 2 are trying to do the quest to give him whatever it is that he wants, and for which in return he would do the key. So the third player used the systemics of the game and the fact that he invested into pickpocketing to steal the key. The other 2, when they arrive, will see that the NPC said, well, I was going to give you the key, but apparently I don't have the key anymore. All right, and so that is also something that you get for free as you want from that multiplayer angle. So we started thinking about this, and we started thinking about how would it be if we are going to make this entire game work in a competitive manner. So you have to know, like with Original Sin, there's actually quite a lot of people that play together with friend, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse. As a matter of fact, there were several marriage proposals inside of Original Sin. So people that put a ring in there and they proposed to it. This guy here, he came to do it in their offices. And the funny thing was actually that she missed the ring. So she had the ring and she was ready to go sell it. And he was going saying, look what it says. And then she obviously eventually got it. So that was kind of cool. This was during the development of Original Sin 1. And so the joke in the office is that where Original Sin brought people together and made them marry, this one is going to make them divorce because of all the things that you can do against each other. So there were 2 things that led us to PvP combat. First was this questioning about what is it like if you're going to compete for scarce resources in this world. Second was, does it really work actually in turn-based combat to play it against each other? So we made a prototype, which is actually the thing that we took to the Kickstarter last year. And it turned out to be tremendous fun. Yeah? Because you had so much things that you can do. You can manipulate the environment. You can put all kinds of statuses on people. You can interact with the elements. You have a whole bunch of things that you can craft. You can prepare the battlefield. You can pretty much turn and twist every single rule of the game, just like you could do in a good pen and paper game. It turned out that PvP combat was a lot of fun. So much fun, in fact, as since we're at PC Gamer here, that PC Gamer Tom Marks, his highlight of 2015 was beating me 4 times at Original Sin 2 PvP combat. And I have to say, the first time I kind of let him win because it was like a presentation. But the second, third, and fourth time, I didn't let him win. Definitely not the fourth time. And so he definitely, yeah, he's very good at it. But it's because he played Original Sin quite a few times already with his girlfriend, if I'm not mistaken. So the combat works well. So then we said, okay, well, if we have the combat, we have to make sure that it works narratively. Because if we can't make it work narratively, then it's useless that we put it in there, because otherwise it's just going to be like, hey, enter the arena. Bang, 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 come out of the arena, and that would be it. So we started thinking about it, and turned out that there were really a lot of ways that we could put that competitive multiplayer inside of the game, and also benefit the single player, because then we suddenly had a party where people were conflicting with each other, where we said, okay, well, actually, if that conflict is there, so with companions, you can have backstabbing, you can have betrayals, and in multiplayer, obviously, well, God knows what's going to come out of it. So here are 4 examples. The first one is my favorite example. This is, so we see, so at this point, I had to put the editor around it for showing it, because we are now looking at such bare-bone graphics. But here's a scene from an escape in a place called Fort Joy. And there's a whole bunch of possible escapes, but this is one of them. There's a little boat that you can take, but there's only one little boat in the entirety of Fort Joy. And so this party of these 2 characters is going to take it, and the other 2 characters, who could be players, are stuck behind. And so they will have to find out other ways of getting out Fort Joy, because the boat is going to be gone and it's not going to come back, unless these guys would return with it and say, hey, you can come on our boat. Now, it sounds like a simple thing, but when you're playing it, it's actually quite a lot of fun, because the other guy says, shit, man, he got the boat, what are we going to do? And the funny thing is that you can set the game such that in single player you're playing against yourself. It's kind of a strange thing, but it's kind of because how we test these things. It's actually not a bad thing to say, oh, I'm going to take the boat, and how am I going to get myself out of here? And then you find that indeed we have multiple ways. This is another example. It's a classic example. It's probably the first thing that you'll think of when you start thinking about this kind of stuff. Is there's one resource, like in this case, an alchemical formula. This particular formula leads you to Necrofire. Necrofire is a new type of surface in the game. It's very bad, but it's the only way that you can learn it is by getting this formula. So if I'm the one that gets it, and I don't share it with you, you're never going to have Necrofire. So you have to find a way of dealing with Necrofire. Now, Necrofire is particularly nasty. There's multiple people here in the game that are going to point you to Necrofire. So if for whatever reason, maybe your origin story says, I'm going to work with Riker, and my other origin story will say, I'll work with the dwarves, and they both want to have Necrofire, well, we're going to have to deal with that too. So I might say, okay, well, you know what? You can give the Necrofire to Riker, but then that's going to come at the expense of my origin story with the dwarf. So that's where you start seeing how those competitive quest lines start interacting with each other. Here we have another example. It's a more systemic example. We have a whole bunch of systems in the world, simulation systems if you want. In Original Sin 2, we have a system of security levels, a little bit inspired by a game called Invisible Ink. And so basically, when your guards detect suspicious activity, they're going to go to a higher security level in the game. Now, it turns out that you can start using that against each other. So if I see that you're involved in some particular entering somebody's property to steal something, then I can maybe raise the security level. In the demo that we gave during the Kickstarter, you could actually go to the guards and say, hey, by the way, he over there, he has stolen something. And then the guard would come to you and say, show me your pockets. And he would scan what's in your inventory and would say, hey, that's contraband. You're not supposed to have that. You would be thrown in jail, and then you would have to figure out how to get out of jail, because we also have a jail system in there. And so like this, we have a whole bunch of new levels of interactions going on to the system, which I'm sure players will be discovering all kinds of ways of using against each other or against the game world, of course, because even if I'm talking a lot about competitive multiplayer, I still think the majority will play in single player, either in single player or cooperatively. But sometimes you might feel the need to do a little bit of things against your other partner, maybe even without him knowing or her knowing. So then another example, different factions. Well, that's also fairly obvious. 2 factions have the same interest. They ask you and your competitive, the other player, no, so, well, you know what I mean with the different factions. One faction asks one thing of one player, the other faction asks another thing of the other player, puts them in conflict with each other. Whose faction is going to win? Why would I select a different faction? Again, because of my origin stories. I didn't explain that particularly well, but I'm sure you understood what I meant. So I'm going to skip this slide for a second. I'll first explain this. The reason why all of this works, why we can give you so much freedom, is because we practice something we call N+1 design, or in Original Sin 2's case, N+2 design. Every single situation, because we don't even talk about quests, every single situation that you put in the game has to be solvable in n ways. So in our case, n is actually 4 because we have multiple players, and there have to be fallbacks. Right? And these fallbacks are important because we give you so much freedom. So we have to have a complete, we call it a rule set that is complete, to make sure that you can have the freedom to basically ruin our entire world and still be able to make progress on your narrative. I was watching a YouTube movie this morning that I just discovered of a girl who was saying how much she enjoyed the game, and she says, you know, what I really liked is that there was no hand holding and I could break the system, but I had this instance where I killed the daughters of a mayor, and now I could never solve the quest of the mayor. And so my instinctive reaction as a designer was like, oh, that's a pity, because we actually foresaw that. We had a solution where you could still solve the situation of the mayor, even if you killed him, because we guarantee you that you can kill anybody in the game and still finish the game and still have a narrative satisfying experience. And so an example of N+2 design, a fairly big example here, is from our Prospect Point demo, which we showed during our Kickstarter campaign. This is a checkpoint event. The game has more than checkpoint events, but checkpoint events are easy to explain because everybody understands them. So guards are stopping people, and these guards are going to allow humans and elves in. They might be convinced to let a lizard in. They're never in their lives going to let a dwarf in. So for the dwarfs, we build an underground tunnel so that the dwarf would also have a way of getting in. Or he could obviously also sneak behind these things here. Or he could teleport himself over the roof, or whatever else you could come. Or he could just kill all the guards. Or he could maybe stack a bunch of crates there, explode them so that the guards would die, but nobody would suspect that it was him, and so forth. But he was never going to get through. And the narrative way that we did was through the tunnel. Now, because we have that N+1 design behind us, we can make our obvious decisions very complicated. We can say, well, persuading these guards, if you happen to be a lizard, is not going to be very easy. We can make it very hard for you to persuade him, and you really have to do a lot of it, because we don't care if you I can't say that, we don't care if you screw it up, because we know there's another solution. And that gives us a lot of freedom as designers also. And that's also why sometimes the game is so bloody hard, because it's we had that freedom to say, well, in this particular situation, you shouldn't be able to get in an easy manner. Obviously, it leads to frustration, but then when you overcome that frustration, you're so very happy as a player. So here's an example in practice from somebody who put these on YouTube not so long ago. And it comes from the first game, from Original Sin. And so he proves our concept, because he's playing the game while destroying and killing pretty much everybody that he can see. All right, so what we're going to see is he's gathered a few explosive barrels, and he has some poisonous barrels also.
Not in the mood for cheese? That excuse has more holes than a slice of this fine camembert.
And so he's placing them everywhere in the world using his telekinesis skill, and then he's causing a chain reaction. So these guys don't know who killed him. Right. So we see that the poison connects to the fire, that's why he put the poison in there also. So everybody's dead, but he's going to be able to finish the game. And he actually proved the point, because the guy turns out to be a serial killer, because what did he do? He then posted a few days later that he arrived in chapter 2 of the game, and can we do it again? He started doing the same stunt over there. So he uses that telekinesis skill, which by now is more developed. And there he goes. There we go.
Tell me, sweetie, do you have a sunburn, or are you always...
Alright. So I was very happy when I saw this, not because obviously I wonder about his, this man's problems, but about the fact that he's doing it and that my system keeps on working, right? Because I know he can still finish the game, and he's even going to find everything that he needs to know to finish the game and all that loot that was there. Typically that was a diary or a note or something scribbled on the wall, or we had backup events that were going to appear. So we had... there's like, I'm not gonna, because we don't talk about our plus X solutions, because otherwise people go for them and then that's not good. But we had like a guy who has like 3 backups that can appear, and then he has a 4th thing that can appear, just to make sure that he was going to survive whatever you were going to come up with. So with 4 players, obviously, we also need a fallback for our fallbacks. Because if the fallback is going to be a diary and you're playing in PvP, and you pick up that diary and says, ha ha, I'm the only one who has this information, I'm never going to share it with anybody anymore, you can basically dash off into the world, and that guy can be stuck. But the idea is that everybody can have a pleasurable narrative experience. So we have fallbacks for the fallbacks. I'm not going to say what they are, but we do have them. I will give you one example in a second. In my ambition slide or feature slide or whatever, you also saw that it says multiplayer in a variety of configurations. So in 2015, we made a console version of Original Sin. So originally the game came out on PC. Last year it came out on Xbox One and PS4. Did very well there also. And one of the really unique things about the console version was that it had a local cooperative play, basically with split screen. So you could play together with 2 controllers on one screen. And people really liked it, because now you could be sitting next to one another and you could be like saying, no, do this, do this, do this. But you could also still go completely different areas of the world. Like here, those 2 are on the beach, while these 2 are already somewhere in a village. And so you could literally go anywhere in the world, but play together on one screen. And you can also do that on the PC version. So for the PC gamer audience, taping that, not enough people know that you can just plug in the controller in the PC version of Original Sin and then play in local split-screen co-op. All right, so it's a very important feature. Now in Original Sin 2, it becomes really cool, because we can basically have 2 couples playing against each other. All right, the couple can be, and they just have to make one internet connection then. Or what we could do also is we can have 2 couples who are playing against each other or with each other, and a game master that is controlling their game. Or we can have 4 players that are playing against each other separately, or one couple with multiple players. And the fun that comes out in the test that we're doing is really, 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 really cool. Anyway, I get excited about this thing all the time. So that's the story about how the multiplayer is improving the single-player experience and how it is going to be quite a lot of fun. Now, these all have the top secret marker next to it. It's because I'm not going to talk about them too much unless you convince me to spill some beans. But we're still developing it. We still have quite some time to go. I will tell you the things that we already spoiled kinda during the Kickstarter campaign. We have a thing called skill crafting. Skill crafting is pretty cool, because in our game, if you want to learn a skill, you have to find a skill book for it. And we made those rare. So it's not necessarily always possible for everybody to know every single skill, which makes for cool party gameplay. Now, skill crafting allows you to combine 2 skill books with one another and make a new skill book. And some of the skills that you will have in Original Sin 2 are only accessible if you have skill crafting. So that means, like for instance, this example here is I combine Lacerate, which is a skill from the Witchcraft school in Original Sin 1, because we don't have Witchcraft in that sense in Original Sin 2. It's a bleeding skill. This is Rain, which is a water skill, obviously, or a Hydrosophist skill, as we called it. So blood and rain create blood rain. And so why would you want to have blood rain in the game? Well, because there's a talent which is called Zombie. I mentioned it before. So if you have the zombie talent and you go stand in blood, then you heal. All right? So when you're attacking people, you're healing from the blood. So if you make it rain blood, there's going to be blood everywhere for you to heal from. So that is one example of skill crafting. We're taking it quite far, actually. I don't know if we're going to manage to make the entire matrix that we've come up with, but if we manage to, you're going to be able to do quite a lot of cool things. And the fun part is that some of these are only going to be accessible by actively doing that skill crafting. This one is turning out to work really well. It's Spirit Vision. So when you kill somebody in Original Sin, a spirit will appear. Some spirits will immediately go to the Hall of Echoes. Some spirits will not. And will stay behind, and you'll be able to interact with them. Sometimes they can be very angry. Sometimes they'll give you some information that you need. Sometimes you use them as an N+2 solution. Here, is an example of the mayor of a village in our prototype was poisoned, and she was in a coma. And so we have an entire quest trying to figure out who poisoned her. But what you could also just do is just kill her, talk to her ghost like, who poisoned you? Oh, that was the last drink I had, and then you knew. So that was an example of spirit vision. So we started coming up with all kinds of puzzles based on this spirit vision, and it's turning out to be a really fun mechanic. So I'm quite fond of it. So I think that's going to be it for me for today, because I'm going to be running out of time also. Yeah, there's it. So if you have any questions, now's pretty much the time.
Yeah. Okay, we'll probably have time for just a few questions because we're running a little...
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's all good stuff. I'm sure they're all questions that people would want to know about anyway. So does anyone have a question they'd like to ask? Yes, sir.
So you say it's competitive. How are you going to treat death in the game?
Say that again?
How are you going to treat one person killing another player in the game?
Well, we're going to leave it up to you and how you're going to set up the sessions. The default is it's permanent. You're dead. And so if nobody resurrects you, that's it. It's over.
That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure.
Well, I mean, the thing is that you're going to play this with friends. We never anticipate this to be something that you're going to be playing online with strangers. This is something, I mean, it's an investment of time of hundreds of hours, typically, if you want to play the full campaign. So that's something you do with people that you know. So if you're going to play a game and the other guy knows that if you're dead, you're dead. All right, that's it. But still, there will be mods that allow you, obviously, to fool around with those rules if you don't like it.
Make sure you trust who you play with, I think. Any other questions? Okay.
Sorry, one more. Obviously, the original Divinity games were a more action RPG style. What made you change to the turn-based combat? And
we always wanted to do turn-based combat, actually. The very first game that we were making was called the Lady Mage Knight, LMK. And that originally started as a turn-based combat. Publisher put it into a real-time combat based on, inspired by Diablo. So that's how Divinity became action RPG. Beyond Divinity was turn-based, and publisher said that's never going to sell. So if you want a contract, you're going to have to make it an action RPG. So third time we knew that we had to make it an action RPG. That was Divinity 2. And then when we went independent and funding the game completely ourselves, basically, we said, okay, we're going to make it turn-based again. And that proved to be a very good idea because there were lots of people who wanted to play turn-based games. Right.
Just goes to show the companies don't always know what they're talking about.
That's very true.
There you go, lovely. Any last question? Yes, sir, right at the back.
In the first original Sin, you had a system where party members could talk to each other, and if they disagreed, it would come down to a rock, paper, scissors battle. Is there something similar in this one?
Yeah, but we changed it. So there's no more rock, paper, scissors. The way that you're going to be discussing with each other is you find something, you find a certain situation. So an example that we showed was the body of your lover didn't survive. Your lover did not survive and escape. And so you find his body. And you go stand there and say, shit, we need to bury him. We can't leave him here like that. And then the other guy who happens to be an outlaw in your party says, fuck that, we're going to loot him. All right? And then you can hear the opinions of everybody in the party, and then you can make your decision. And what happens is we have this relation system behind the scenes that is tracking the relationship in the party. So if I, for instance, as a noble of the ancient empire would say, well, obviously we have to give this man a decent burial, and the other guy says we have to loot him, then I know already that my relation with the lizard is going to change if we don't give him a burial, and I know that the other guy is going to think less of me if we do give him the burial, depending on whether how important he thinks that is. And so that has been embedded throughout the entire game. So you get this really complex dynamics of relationships going on. So it is not so silly anymore as rock, paper, scissors, which is essentially just a die throw, but which led to quite a lot of fun for certain players, but other players hated it. So now it is a bit more embedded in the narrative. But because the thing is that even in Original Sin, it was already like the case. Will we let them live? Yeah, okay, rock, paper, scissors, okay, I won, okay. He died him he killed him anyway. So because you could do it. It's the rules were there, so it was really in multiplayer. It was a tool for you to figure out if you could agree with it. You could still do whatever you wanted afterwards anyway. And in the single player, we actually also made it that was a way of convincing people. So that's completely gone now. So now the convincing persuasion mechanics are more embedded in the entire tax system.
So again, choose who you play with carefully,
yes.
I think, to draw away from all of that. I just wanted to say, can we have a big round of applause, please, for Sven for coming to talk about it?
Thank you.